Hello, everyone, and in the latest Locked On Canadiens, we're going to talk the World Championships, we're going to talk the Laval Rocket coaching search, and is NHL playoff officiating as bad as fans have made it seem?
You're Locked On Canadiens, your daily podcast on the Montreal Canadiens, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the latest episode of Locked On Canadiens. We are your daily Montreal Canadiens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where you get your team every single day of the week, wherever you listen to your daily podcast, Google, Apple, Spotify, or here on YouTube.com. I am, of course, your host for today's show, Scott Matla, and today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. We've got a very fun show here. It is the end of the long weekend here in the United States. It is technically Memorial Day today. If my voice sounds a little shot, I have been out with the barbecues with family and some other stuff this weekend. So allergies and just, bonfire smoke and everything. I am a little hoarse, so I apologize for that. I'm flying solo on today's episode. We've got so much planned for you. We're going to talk about the World Championships, the Laval Rocket coaching search, and playoff officiating. I know everybody's favorite thing in the world because right now, Dallas and Edmonton are getting ready to play in the background here. And I will be tuning into that as soon as I am done editing with this show here. But I want to start with the World Championships because these ended last week after we had finished after our episodes and everything. And I really wanted to highlight this because I think it is important. Czechia won the tournament in their home country. The photos and everything have been spectacular. And there were some things with this that it's not just that Czechia won. They are a very good hockey country. Any country that produces Jaromir Jagr is a country worth taking note of here. It's that they didn't do it by beating one of the big four in this tournament. They beat the Swiss for the gold medal in this tournament. And it's not Czechia winning that is the prominent, important part, but it is still important, and we'll touch on why. It is the Swiss being in this game in such a way that we talked about this with World Juniors, and it always comes up, is that why do all these small countries that just get blown out get invited? It should be like these six, like the US, Finland, Sweden, Czechia, Slovakia, and Canada. And maybe sometimes it's Germany, maybe sometimes it's Switzerland, but like some of these countries just come here and get blown out. And to that I say this tournament should have shown up as a good reason for why it's nice to see the underdogs sometimes stun the international giants in hockey here. David Pastrnak had the best quote after winning the gold medal was, "Four nations soon, ? Because Czechia, as you'll remember, were not invited. It was the US, Canada, Finland, and Sweden. Those are what I am considering the big four. If Russia were allowed in international tournaments, I would say that is the big five. And I am so grateful to see that not only did the Swiss come out and punch Canada in the face and send them reeling at first, held on, they won in the shootout there. They won in a situation that required, they had an overtime penalty kill, and watching the Swiss come away with that win over Canada, a team that was loaded with talent. This is not some AHLers and a couple of guys from teams that didn't make the playoffs. John Tavares was on this team. There were good players on this Canadian team, and the Swiss stunned them. And this is such a good thing for hockey as a whole internationally here. We talk about it at World Juniors that like when a country like, let's say, Austria or Latvia or Germany or whomever upsets an established great, whether it be Finland, whether it be Sweden, the US, Canada, Russia, when they were in these tournaments, if that's the only game they win, that's still a good thing because you have to start somewhere in growing the international game of hockey. And in the last couple of years, we've seen Germany really come into its own as a hockey nation. And I know that Switzerland is the team that we're focusing on here, but I'm applying this across the board here. And they've slowly crept their way up to becoming a team that needs to be respected, that you do not sleep on the German team because of how talented their players have become. Switzerland is the same way. Yes, there are a lot of NHL castoffs on this team, but they came out and they competed hard and they did everything that was necessary for this. And they came away, yes, a silver medal. They didn't win in the end because Czechia was, they won 2-0. That's not like it was a blowout in the finale here. The Swiss came to play and were a very good team in this tournament. But all these wins lead further down the road to bigger accomplishments. I look at where Slovakia was a couple of years, not even a couple of years ago, let's say 6 or 7 years ago. I'm trying to think of when I covered World Juniors. They, even going all the way back into Montreal, the Dennis Godela Martin Revi team. This is a team that nobody gave any business in any game. And what did they do? They won a bronze medal in that game. Dennis Godela made a complete legend status out of himself in that tournament. They didn't win the biggest prize, but they won everyone's hearts and minds. And there were younger Slovakian hockey players who might have been in youth programs or whatever who watched that tournament and go, I want to be just like them. I want to take that to the next level. I can bet you there are kids in Swiss programs who watch this team here at the World Championships beat Canada. That's an incredible feat in and of itself. Canada is the hockey power in the world. In this country of Switzerland, which has far less rinks and other things as part of their hockey program than Canada, came out and beat the giants of the game. This is a good thing for international hockey. The underdogs winning and drawing attention to it and maybe getting some extra funding, getting more kids into their programs who maybe weren't sure or they were going to continue with that to inspire them to that next level is incredible stuff. That is what the sport of hockey is meant to be about. I love seeing things like this. I'm like, am I upset that the U.S. didn't get a medal in this? Yes, absolutely. Because again, USA Hockey is going to USA Hockey, whether it be coaching or decisions and whatnot. They didn't win. Big countries getting a reality check is just as important for them as these young countries getting that building block win that builds that next generation of soccer stars that remember that moment very clearly. And I'm not comparing it to this because the levels are different, but I go back to the 1999 Women's World Cup, where the U.S. women won that. That set off such an incredible movement to then creating an international soccer power here that even the smallest victory for you, even if it's just beating Canada, can be used to build up here. And these established countries losing or going with flawed teams and just expecting that they're going to roll over teams. This is probably one of the more stacked world championships I've seen because everybody's getting ready for the Olympics and Four Nations and they're trying to look good in front of their teams. And only one Big Four country came away with a medal in this. Czechia won gold, Switzerland won the silver, and Sweden beat Canada for the bronze. That's one out of those four countries that medaled in this. And now teams have to look at this. Is it our coaching staff? Did we bring the right players? Are we playing the right system? Are we doing what we need to do for this program to really continue to be a power? You cannot just coast by on, hey, here's a bunch of guys who were good at one time. And this has happened in Canada. It's happened a lot in the US. You have to adapt to the change. And if you just keep getting by because your talent level is a baseline higher, you don't learn anything. Sometimes you blow out teams because you were just that much better than them. That is fine. But when you lose games like this, you have to look at your line and be like, why did we go down early? Why weren't we able to really come back full force and win this game? We had opportunities to do so. What can we do to make our team better here for Four Nations? What do we need to do? And yes, there will be guys like Connor McDavid and Mitch Marner and Sidney Crosby, etc., on that Four Nations team. But if you don't take some of the lessons from this, whether it be a coaching style or some sort of influence on that and apply it, you can still run into the same problems. We've seen superstar teams not get anywhere. Except for, the under 23 Young Guns team. That team ruled, and I'm sad that it's never coming back. Like, I look at what that tournament final in the World Cup of Hockey was. It was under 23 versus rest of Europe, unless I missed. No, because it was Canada, because Carey Price won everything. Duh. Anyways, established powers losing and young up and coming countries having upset wins are both good things because it doesn't allow just teams to stay complacent. It continues to ensure that you will get the best of all of these teams in international tournaments, that more and more teams are going to try and improve what they can do to really get to that next level. I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts on Czechia winning the World Championships, and what the Swiss meddling, and what teams like Canada and Finland and the US not really making much of a long-term impact means for the sport of hockey? You can tweet us at LO_Canadiens, LockedOnCanadiens@gmail.com. Coming up next, I do want to touch on the Laval Rocket coaching search and what's the updates on that coming up next. But first, as I said off the top of the show, today's show is brought to you by FanDuel, and it is winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own, because right now new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Is Connor McDavid going to will this Edmonton Oilers team to victory? Is the return of Roope Hintz going to push Dallas over the edge? Can he start piling up the points? How many, more elbows is Jacob Trouba going to throw in the Panthers Rangers series? You can find all of these things at FanDuel. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sports book. We are back here at Locked On Canadiens. I am, of course, your host. I am Scott Matla. I am flying solo for tonight's episode. And one of the things I've been asked about privately and just in some other places is, hey, what's going on with the Laval Rocket? Are they keeping their coach? Is the coach staying? Is he going? And to be quite honest, there isn't a lot going on right now. However, there has been some rumblings around here. There is some news. Coach Kelly Buchberger has left the Laval Rocket to go to the AHL as one of their AJHL. My apologies. The Alberta Junior Hockey League as one of their coaches. Though it's been known that he was likely leaving since last year. It was discussed that he wanted to take some time back to be closer to his family. He was a little bit older as a coach, and that's entirely understandable for that. I think there's a lot of defensemen in this prospect defensemen in this system who are going to miss him. He's done a really good job turning a lot of these defensemen into the next level here. So the question becomes, what does that mean for the rest of the staff here? It's up in the air. And right now we know that Kelly Buchberger is not back. And this is coming from an article from one of the French sources out there. It seems like Jean-Francois Houle will be coming back. That he's likely to be re-upped, whether it be a year, 2 years, or something like that. But the question is, who is going to potentially be joining him? Is the staff? They're waiting for everyone else to potentially be, whether they want to leave or stay. Right now, it seems like they're opting towards keeping everybody else on that staff. Martin Leperrier, Marco Marciano, Charles Junot. Kelly Buchberger leaves a gap on that bench. So what does that mean? Who could come in for there? One of the names that I have heard and that I think actually would be a phenomenal coaching option for the Laval Rocket, whether he's working with the defense or the forwards or just as an assistant coach, is Paul Byron, who is currently a player development consultant for the Canadiens here. I think he's got the mindset and the ability to be a really strong asset for this team. And I think that he is someone who could follow that path up to the NHL, maybe not directly like Martin St. Louis, but as someone who could join that staff in a handful of years' time. And that I think he as a former player, he's one of those guys. He went he was a late round draft pick. He was a small guy, bounced around the minors, and then made it to the NHL full-time in Montreal. He has that kind of mindset for. What do you think what you would want young players to experience? Because it's not even first overall picks. If for whatever reason you were in the AHL, does not mean it's going to be sunshine and rainbows and that everything is going to come easy. I think that Paul Byron, quite frankly, is a really good option for that. I don't think he would be the defensive coach, which is what Buchberger was doing, but I think someone as a general assistant or associate coaches that we started seeing more and more, he would be a really strong piece of that. And one of these articles also says Sylvain Favreau, who is coaching the Drummondville Voltigeurs. If Houle comes back, this article goes on to say that they could be named as an assistant to that. There is an opening, so we will see a new coach here. I'm curious if there are other staff members coming back or not. And if multiple people are not coming back, we may see a whole different lineup. But I really do think that Paul Byron is someone that I would like to see on the bench with the Rocket next year. I think that now with John Sedgwick as the actual general manager of that team, he's going to want to bring in the pieces that they have worked at getting a certain playing style and culture built to get that up into the NHL. And I think Paul Byron is a guy, as a coach, who helps fill that in. And some people ask, well, what about Francois Bouillon, Francis Bouillon, my apologies, who has been working in player development and with the Canadiens as well. Apparently Bouillon has said flat out, he's like, coaching is not for me. Being behind the bench is maybe not his favorite thing to do in the world. He likes working as a player development consultant, someone who, battled and scrapped and made his way up to the NHL, made a nice little career out of it before moving into where he's at now. I don't think he's one of the top options just based on his own preference for what he likes to do. He might work with the Rocket behind the scenes, like player development and practice, like they've done with Marie-Philippe Poulin, with Paul Byron in the past, and other pieces of this player development staff, which is a huge bonus. But I don't think I would expect to see him suit and tie behind the bench for the Laval Rocket. It's been oddly quiet. Like Kelly Buchberger has left, and we knew that was going to come. And then the Rocket are just kind of hanging out here. And I think they're waiting for these contracts to expire. I want to say it might be the beginning of June, depending on when they were signed, that it will, when they do expire there. And people have asked, well, do you want Jean-Francois Houle back behind the bench in Laval next year? And I'm like, I have said I am not opposed to this, because I look at the work this staff in conjunction with the Canadiens player development team have managed to put together a really strong prospect pool here. As long as the drafting continues well with this player development staff in place, I think they can get the most out of a lot of people. I'm excited to see what they do with David Reinbacher over the summer, going into rookie camps in his first full AHL season. Lane Hudson, if he is there. Someone like Florian Jekai, who's coming in with a lot of raw physical assets that he needs to, fine tune a little bit. Watching him play in the AHL, Florian Jekai is going to be a problem. He's a mean dude, and I want to see what they can do with him. I look at what they did with Logan Mailloux this past year, someone who has all these physical gifts, things that you cannot always teach, and then molding that into a player who is a lot more defensively responsible, who is doing all the things coaches want to see on the ice. There are brain farts, but those are still things that can be coached. I look at William Trudeau going from just being a guy to even struggling a little bit this year to bouncing back to being that consistent, anytime, any place kind of defenseman. There's so many promising young guys in this system who seem to be taking that next step. Sometimes it's a little slower. Sean Farrell's been a little uneven as he's gone through injuries, but I want to see what this coaching staff can do. And I think Jean-Francois Houle is a perfectly fine candidate for that. It's what can they do to, help supplement that? I still think Paul Byron is a phenomenal idea. Anthony Marcotte suggested it originally, that I think he would be a phenomenal add to this bench as someone who can do the player development part of that while also coaching this team. And maybe he moves up if they move on from a Alex Burrows, a Trevor Letowski, or whomever. And I'm not saying that any of those coaches are potentially going to be moving anytime soon at the NHL level. But if that time ever came, that Paul Byron can step into that. And also, I love Paul Byron. One of my favorite stories, one of those fantastic cult heroes in Montreal, someone that I cannot wait to see more of in a role with the Canadiens. And I'm really hoping that if it is offered to him, he accepts. If not, and it's because he wants to stick with doing the player development side only, more power to him to focus on that as well. I guess we'll find out stuff in the coming weeks here. We're inching closer and closer to the NHL draft, the draft combine, free agency, everything. We are inching so much closer to all the little fun things. And we have so much more for you here at Locked On Canadiens. However, we're going to swing things back to somewhere the Canadiens are not currently participating. Again, the NHL playoffs. Is the officiating as bad as we think? We're going to find out coming up next. So this is always a touchy one because as everyone who's listened to this podcast or watched this podcast knows, I love to just rail against NHL officiating because I think, for the most part, it's hot garbage. I think it's inconsistent. It's from the on ice to the situation room to player safety. I think it is flawed. I think it has a lot of problems. And this year, it seems especially that this is the year that playoff officiating has gone too far. I'm mad. I'm mad in this fan base, and I'm mad in this fan base, and this fan base is mad in this. Nobody appears to be very happy with the NHL officiating. And no one seems more unhappy with NHL officiating than Edmonton Oilers fans who just seem to want to complain about it nonstop. Any single time that they have lost a game, those darn officials and their officiating and calling actual penalties that were penalties, whatever, in a game that you won. Is it as bad as we've all thought, or just coaches and fans complaining more? And my thought is it's a little bit of both. We live in an era where you have unfiltered access to potentially the dumbest of a fan base on the biggest social media apps, especially if they have a blue check mark, and you are forced to sit there and listen to it or see it, whether you want to or not. And I think sometimes they have a point, is that, yes, NHL playoff officiating is inconsistent at best, dangerous at its worst. And I think that's the best way that I can phrase that for our listeners here. And I'm of the mind that, yeah, it's not been great, but I don't know if it's been as atrocious as other people might have potentially thought. But then I go to looking at the Rangers and Panthers game the other day, where I watched Jacob Trouba, elbow out, go and hit Evan Rodriguez. And some people say, I hit him in the shoulder and this. He's leading with one of these that has a Kevlar Iron Man body armor thing on the end of it, aiming for a dude's head and neck. And this is not the first time we've seen that. He nearly killed Marty Necas in the last round, and then almost killed himself, and then almost killed Marty Necas again. And for his troubles in that game, he got a minor penalty for someone who does not deserve the benefit of the doubt in that. And I look at that and I go, maybe people have a point. And then I look at the Panthers just throughout the playoffs in general, and the amount going right back to, I believe it was Sam Bennett punching Brad Marchand in the face. And I go, well, the shoe's on the other foot here. And that was missed because the NHL apparently didn't have that angle in their review, which is just wild to me for some reason. The Oilers series is a difficult one because, quite frankly, I am openly rooting against the Oilers because, God, I am so tired of just listening to every single time McDavid touches the puck. If he gets touched and it doesn't get called, every Oilers fan I've seen loses their mind. And I'm just kind of tired of saying it. And I look at that series and I look at Dallas's season stats. Dallas just doesn't take penalties. They were a team that plays a disciplined brand of hockey. And that isn't a new thing. This was a regular season statistic. And that, yes, are there some things that maybe here or there should get called? Potentially, yes. But to act like Dallas is getting away with murder on every shift blows my mind because no, they're a team that just plays a disciplined brand of hockey. And I know that's a hard pill to swallow. Because there are some teams that look at the Bruins, I look at the Panthers that, wow, magically nothing gets called on them in the playoffs. That's a little different. This one for me is I kind of look at it and go, no, the numbers are there, guys. Like, just score some goals. Maybe you have the best player in the world and allegedly one of the other top 5 players in the world. Do something about it. And I know that this seems like I'm playing, both halves against each other. So that way, no matter what, I come out on top, because that's smart thinking on my end. I think NHL playoff officiating is what it always has been, in that it is inconsistent, in that it is not a personal vendetta against your team. The officials and the NHL situation room and everything just suck at their job across the board. They are inconsistent across the board for almost every single team, it feels like. And that it doesn't get better because no one is held to a standard for anything in those groups. And I do worry about that. I mean, I've watched, a Chris Lee special. I've watched Nick Suzuki get punched in the face while standing there, and the ref shake his head at him and not call a penalty. I think where I'm most concerned is on goal scoring plays. The inconsistency for goaltender interference. It seems like there was a standard for one part of it, like maybe that's a standard for a game, but then it changes for the next one. And that's where my concerns rise, and where fans have every right to potentially be furious, because if you're taking goals off the board for what could charitably be described as an arbitrary reason right now, I understand why you were mad. Absolutely get it. But I also think that comes down to the fault of the people above them, who have never established a standard for what goaltender interference is, and probably never will, because it is complicated. I do fear a little bit for the future of that, because if we don't know what it is, sooner or later, worse and worse things are going to happen until somebody does something. But to answer kind of my own question, I think the playoff officiating is as rough as it's always been. Not better or worse. It is what it is. It's inconsistent and it's messy. It's just that this year, coaches seem to be tolerating it a lot less. We've seen Sheldon Keefe. We've seen Jim Montgomery. We've seen Paul Maurice. We've seen Chris Knobloch of the Oilers. We've seen Rick Tocchet in Vancouver. We've seen coaches just give it to the officiating on the bench and in the postgame, whether or not they're getting fined on things. They're kind of subtle about it, but they're saying the quiet part out loud more and more often now. And I think that's leading to people being like, yeah, that is terrible. Why didn't I think of that? You did think of that. You just didn't say it out loud. You put it on Twitter. This coach is saying it, so now it has confirmed your bias in this situation here. I think it's as inconsistent and rough as it's always been. It's just that now coaches seemingly are willing to take the bullet for a fine, whether that comes down from the GM or the owner to be like, you just let everyone know, because everyone's going to watch this press conference if they think there was a controversial call in this. And you know what? What clips get replayed on Twitter, on Sports Center, and on the radio? The coach calling out the officials. And you're hearing it more and more and more and more. Players, not so much, because they're likely to get dinged by fines a lot easier than coaches are. But you hear the coaches criticizing the officials more and more and more, played more and more and more, because it makes good, easy headlines. And, people who make their living on content for stuff like that absolutely love that kind of stuff. So I think that overall, the officiating's, like I said, just as bad as it's always been. We're just hearing about it more. We do want to hear from you. You can at LO_Canadiens, LockedOnCanadiens@gmail.com. As always, you can follow us on Twitter. You can follow Laura at the Active Stick. Follow myself at Scott Manella. You can subscribe wherever you get your daily podcast. Google, Apple, Spotify, or on YouTube.com to see faces like this one. We will be back with another episode tomorrow. And until then, we will see you all next time.